Let's talk about Sky Team Prepare for Landing, a super tense two-player game about landing a plane. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a super tense cooperative two-player game about landing a plane at an airport. It's a game called Sky Team by Scorpion Masqué. I hope I'm saying that right. Sky Team Prepare for Landing is the full title of this one. This is a two-player game, like I said, and it is cooperative. The box says age 14 and up. I think age 12 maybe could figure this out because it is cooperative. You do get to communicate and plan ahead. Games only take about 20 minutes to play, but you might lose long before 20 minutes comes up. Let's take a deeper look at Sky Team Prepare for Landing by Scorpion Masqué. Sky Team is medium in terms of its complexity. The rules are simple enough, but it is complex in order to, it's hard to win this game, but the rules are fairly simple and it is modular. So there are various missions in the box that make things more difficult, I think, for the players. And there's a tutorial mission that's pretty straightforward just to get you used to the rules. The tutorial puts you as a plane that's landing at the Montreal airport, which was fun for me as a Canadian. The Montreal airport is only a couple of hours away from me. The goal of this game is to land the plane at the airport, and I'll explain how that's done. There are lots of ways that you can mess this up along the way, but your goal is to get this plane to the airport and to make sure that you don't overshoot the runway or that your altitude doesn't go down too much before you hit the runway. So there are a number of different things that you have to have in place in order for that landing to occur. It's a cooperative game, and thematically it probably makes sense. You've got a blue player who's the pilot, you've got the orange player who's the co-pilot. Each player has this little screen that is in front of them to hide their dice. You roll your dice behind the screen so that the other player doesn't know what you have. There's some limited communication that I'll talk about. Each player's got 4 dice that they're going to roll, but before you roll the dice, there's a strategic discussion that's going to take place at the beginning of each round. So your round is each player is taking turns placing a die on the control panel. But before that round begins, before even you've rolled your dice, you're going to have a discussion about, well, what do you need to do on that turn? You get to plan ahead with the other player. Now, it's a discussion where you're not talking about dice and numbers, oh, put your highest die on this or your lowest die on that. It's meant to be more of a thematic discussion. We need to make sure that we get the flaps down this turn, or we have to make sure that there's no planes in our way because we want to move forward a couple of spaces before the end of the round. You know, it's meant to be like we want to speed up or we want to slow down or we want to radio these planes to get them out of our way so that we don't collide with them. And then you roll the dice. And then each player is going to take turns placing dice, but there's no communication allowed once the round starts in terms of what numbers you have. The communication is the numbers that you place. Now, you've got this great little board that has these little toggles. These are just cardboard punch-out pieces that move back and forth. In the final round, you're going to win. How do you land this plane successfully? Well, it has to be horizontal when you get to the end. Your speed has to be lower than the number on your brakes dial over here. Your landing gear has to be down, your flaps have to be down. So there's a number of things that have to happen in order for the plane to land successfully, and there's lots of ways that you can crash on the way. Now, the easy mission here for Heathrow, the only thing that it adds that the tutorial mission doesn't have is this black die. This is a traffic die. So you're going to roll this at the beginning of each round, and that's going to indicate where you're going to put, you can hear them rattling around, where you're going to put this extra plane on the track. Oh, so now there's 2 planes in the way on this space that I'm going to have to clear before I crash into them. Because if your plane moves forward, this is your plane moving forward. So this is the horizontal axis and this is your altitude. If your plane moves forward and winds up hitting one of these planes, it's game over for you. So you have 4 dice to place. There are 2 spots on the board that are mandatory. So at the end of the round, these spots have to be filled. They're marked on the control panel here with the little exclamation point just to make sure that you don't forget. You don't have to place those first, although you might want to place those dice early in the game to give your co-pilot or your pilot some idea about the numbers that you have and what you're trying to do. In fact, you probably don't want the tilt to be the last die you place, because then you're going to be stuck at the end with whatever number you have left. And so if we put dice like this, you're looking at the difference. So if the pilot places a 2 and the co-pilot places a 5, you're going to be tilting the plane 3 turns this way, and that's going to cause it to spin out and crash. That's going to be game over. The other mandatory space on the control panel are your engines. So there needs to be dice placed on the engines. That's going to dictate how far this track moves forward, that horizontal axis. Like I said, you're moving towards your airport where you're trying to land, and you've got these little counters here that are indicators of speed. So as you play through the game, there's a few spots here for your landing gear. The pilot can lower the landing gear in any order. So I could start with this one down here if I had a high number. You're going to flip this toggle like this. Once I've placed one in the landing gear, now this space, if I put a die in this space later on in the game, nothing happens. But as the landing gear goes down, this blue counter moves forward. Similarly, I can place some dice on the flaps that are going to slow things down for the plane. These ones have to go in order. You can tell from the little arrow here. So if I put a 2 in that 1 and 2 space, see it says 1 or 2, then I can flip this down. That's going to move this forward. So what this is doing is slowing the plane down. How does that work? Well, when I place dice on the engines, I'm going to look at the total number. So if I've got a total of 11, that's right here. That means because it's past this orange, I'm going to move 2 spaces ahead, which would crash the plane. So I don't want to do that on my first turn. If I move in between these 2 spots, so if I get a total of 6 or 7 or 8 or even 9, so say I put a 2 in here and that's going to give me a total of 8, I move 1 space forward. That's something I may want to do, because in the next round, if I don't move forward, I'm going to have to roll the traffic die again. It's going to add another plane that I might crash into. If I put really low numbers on the engine, if it's below this blue, the plane's not going to move at all. And the speed at which you're moving that plane forward is super important. You're looking at the altitude, at how far away, how many rounds you have before you get to the airport, but you're also thinking about what's on this track. You don't want to have a collision with the plane. You don't want this little traffic icon to be showing, because that means every round that you're stuck there, more planes are going to be added in your path, and those are a little hard to get rid of. So you do kind of on the first turn in this game, you want to move forward 1, and then you might want to be in a holding pattern for a second until you clear some of these planes. Now, how do you get rid of a plane? Well, you've got a couple of radio spots. Well, the co-pilot has 2, the pilot has 1, so there's a chance I could get rid of 3 planes. In this case, I can get rid of, because I put a number 2 on the radio, I count forward, 1, 2, that's going to get rid of a plane on this second spot going forward. I obviously will need a 1 on this one to make sure that I don't crash in the next turn, or else I'm just going to stay stationary. Now, again, you could get rid of a second one all the way up at space 5 if you're that far away. So you are thinking, like, you've got to look at the axis, you've got to think about what's coming up and the speed, and if you see that your pilot or your co-pilot are trying to move the plane forward quite far, you might be thinking then, okay, well, I need to make sure that these spaces are clear. In this case, like I said, once you get to this spot, you may want to be in a holding pattern until you can clear some of these planes out of the way, because there's no icon that's going to add more planes to your path. So before you land, you have to have all of these toggled green. Your landing gear has to be down. Your flaps have to all be down as well. You need green lights on all of those. And the other thing that needs to happen when you're ready to land this plane is that your final speed in the final round has to be lower than the number on this brake. So this is your brake counter. How do you activate that? Well, this is another one that has to go in order. So you have to start by placing a number 2. Only a number 2 can turn on the brake, and because it's blue, only the pilot can be the one who's activating those brakes. Now you've got another green light that's on. Next turn, maybe I'm going to want a 4. It might not be a rush to activate all of these brakes and move this forward, because really this part is only important in the final round when you're landing the plane, and you might be concentrating more on clearing the traffic out of the way or getting the landing gear down to influence the speed at which the plane is moving. The final spot is at the very bottom of the board. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this very well on the camera, but there are 3 spaces down at the bottom that either the co-pilot or the pilot can add a die to. And those spots are, well, they're called concentration spots. Any number can go there. And as I said, any player can put a die there. That's going to give you this little coffee cup that you put on your control panel. You can spend, either player can spend one of these concentration tokens, these coffee cups, to change a die, up one or down one. You can spend multiple cups on one roll. If you've really missed it, messed everything up, maybe you're going to need to spend all 3. There's a maximum of 3. There's only 3 of these tokens in the box, so there's a maximum of 3 coffee that you can spend, but that would allow me to say if I roll a 6 and I wanted a 3, I can spend all 3 of these if I've earned them earlier in the game to drop that die down to a lower number. Once all the dice have been placed, the altitude counter moves forward 1, and then you collect your dice and you begin the next turn. If you've lowered the landing gear, that stays where it is. All of these counters stay where they are. If I've activated a brake, that counter is going to stay. If I've lowered these flaps, everything stays the same, but I take the dice back and you start the new round. Okay, now your discussion might be, we don't want to move forward this round. We want to focus on clearing these planes. Maybe we want to focus on, oh, we don't want to lower the flaps too much yet because we want to jump over this spot. We want to move forward 2 when we're ready to move so that we don't have to add more traffic to the board. Ultimately, you want things to look like this at the end of the game. You need your speed to be lower than the brakes or else you overshoot the runway. You need all of your lights to be green on here so that you can land safely, and this needs to be horizontal so that you don't crash. What skills, though, are you working on when you play Sky Team Prepare for Landing? Well, one thing is you're coping with some stress. This is a stressful game. You're puzzling out, oh my gosh, if you get a bad roll, it's going to be game over. If you're stuck with the dice and you wind up spinning the plane, or you don't have the number that's going to allow you to lower that final flap before you get to the end, there's lots of ways that you can lose, and that can be stressful. Primarily, though, we're talking about executive functioning skills. The executive functions are the skills and behaviors that you need to work towards a goal. Paying attention to detail, planning ahead, budgeting those dice, budgeting those actions. You're thinking about where you want these tracks to go. Well, one of them is going to move ahead automatically no matter what. You're thinking about where you want this airport track to be at the end of each turn, what you need to do in order to land the plane. Do you want to slow things down at the beginning, or you want to wait until later in the game before you start slowing things down? That's risky because you need certain numbers. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of thinking ahead. There's a lot of sort of sustained attention here in terms of making sure you're not missing anything. Fluid reasoning skills are also important when you're playing Sky Team. Now, fluid reasoning is like flexible problem solving. It's being able to generate a solution to a new kind of problem, or being able to adjust your strategy to meet new parameters. And here you've got a situation where you might talk about your plan with your co-pilot, and then the dice don't cooperate. And then you're not allowed to say, oh, I've only got high numbers, I've only got low numbers. You've got to sort of communicate that by which dice you place where and the number that's showing when you place it. So it is a game where you have to really adjust your approach, adjust your approach to the airport, but adjust your approach to the game itself, the puzzle that each round poses based on the dice that you've got. And that's an example of fluid reasoning in action. Now, another sort of skill that's related to fluid reasoning is quantitative reasoning, solving problems involving quantities. Math reasoning is what we're talking about here, and you are doing some math involving the spatial skills of how far do you need to move and when do you need to do that, what numbers need to come up here, and where is that total going to fall in order to move ahead the right amount. How do I budget dice to make sure that I'm not flipping the plane over as I'm placing them here on this axis? there is some math reasoning, some problem solving that you're doing when you play the game. And I think that just adds to the tension maybe because the dice change every round and then you've got to be really flexible about what you do with them. Final thoughts about Sky Team Prepare for Landing. Well, this is a thematic game. I mean, you've got your control panel here with all you've got this, I really like this board. It is very thematic, even in terms of the way that the rules explain that strategic discussion, the communication before the round begins. And it's tense. So I can't think of, well, it's been a while since I played a cooperative game like this that's got a two-player count where you're really limited in terms of what you can say during your turn, and the tension ramps up and ramps up and ramps up the closer you get to your altitude coming down to the bottom here on this track. It's got a small footprint. You don't need a large table to play this one. And there's lots of replayability because there's so many missions in the box that add these modular components that might make things more difficult or maybe more interesting for you. Like I said, even just flipping this over to get a track that has much more traffic spaces on it is going to change your thinking about how you tackle that game. It's got a quick play time, and it's strategically challenging, but with rules that make sense. And I think with the theme of the game, it's easier to understand what you're doing. It's not so abstract. I mean, maybe these little trackers are a little abstract, but I mean, you need to have those green lights on, and you understand from the graphics here and from the rulebook too, you understand what each die is going to do when you place it. And I do like that nonverbal communication of letting your co-pilot or your pilot know what you've rolled by strategically placing a certain number in a certain space. And then you've got to interpret that nonverbal information. That's sort of where some of the quantitative reasoning comes in. So I just think that this thing is brilliant. We had a lot of fun playing it, but boy, it was hard to win those harder missions. Even the easy missions, you can't just breeze through them. Are there downsides, though, to Sky Team Prepare for Landing? Well, one is that it is a two-player game, so if you've got multiple people around the table, this is going to be a hard one to pull out. We did, though, the first time we play it, the first time we played this one, we divided into two teams, and so we had two people on one side and two on the other, and the teams were kind of sliding their dice around on the bottom of the screen to say, oh, I kind of want this one to go towards the axis, and so that we could communicate between the team members without communicating information about your roles to the other players in the game so that we weren't really breaking the rules there. But it is a two-player game for sure. A worry that I had in this game, and in fact this happened multiple times when I was setting things up, taking it out of the box or putting it away, is that these pieces are tiny. And my worry is that you're going to lose one of these toggle switches or something like that. They're not attached in any way to that dual layer board. They're just meant to sit so that you can slide them back and forth. One thing I wish they maybe would have done in this box is to have some extras of these just in case you lose one. All of the pieces are quite tiny and easy to drop, and I did drop them more than once, I will confess. It's a game box where the plastic is reduced, so there was no plastic wrap around the outside. The box was taped shut, and then there's a paper bag for all these little components. So it's not a Ziploc, it's a little paper bag that had a silica gel pack in it. So I think that's environmentally, that's great. However, in terms of losing the pieces, it could be challenging. Now, there are plenty of these planes, but like I said, it would have been nice to have maybe some extra parts in case you lose one of these little tiny fiddly pieces. It's a challenging one for new players. That's another thing that maybe is a downside. Like if you haven't played this one before, you really have to wrap your head around like, what's the strategy? How can I win this game? It took us a couple of games before we realized, the importance of really managing your approach and not just trying to keep things in lockstep with the altitude track on the board. So new players maybe have a bit to wrap their head around. It is challenging, But thankfully, they did include that tutorial mission, so it's pretty easy to get up to speed with the game that only takes about 20 minutes to play. So, a new player comes in, you show them how you land at the Montreal airport, and then you introduce kind of the next level that has one extra rule, and you can move forward from there. So it's a hard game when you're first learning it. Like the rules are easy, but the strategy maybe is more challenging. But they do have ways to sort of ease you in. So look, I think for me, Sky Team is a winner. We had a lot of fun playing this thing. It's super thematic. The color scheme I really like. Having a co-op two-player game. I think the last one I played that was a co-op two-player game was Sail, but that's more of a trick-taking game. So this is very different and very thematic, and we really enjoyed Sky Team. I understand that there are some other airports and things like that that you can add to the game. So fantastic game, like well deserving of the awards and the award nominations that it got when it came out. We really like Sky Team. If you have any questions about Sky Team or suggestions or anything else to do with Brains on Games, you can of course leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. Previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the X handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.